Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel here on Port Royal Pop, and welcome to episode 3 of The Last of Us Afterparty. So full spoiler alert, if you haven't seen episode 3 of The Last of Us yet, we are going to be talking about these shows if you've seen it, so just save this in your watch later and come back and watch it after you watch the new episode. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get into the discussion around The Last of Us episode 3. And just off the bat, I'm going to say that we're 3 episodes in, and already I can say that we are living through and we are experiencing one of the best adaptations of a source material ever made for the screen. Adaptation in the broad sense of the term, meaning they've taken an original work, they've adapted it for the screen, they've improved the story, they've enhanced the story, they've made adjustments here and there to the story, which makes the overall product better and enhances the story with everything that they've done so far. And going into episode 3, I believe they did tell us that this was going to be like the most steering off the course of the main game storyline of the show so far. And watching episode 3 now, yes, it has. But that's not a bad thing, because what they've done is they've taken a background character from the game. They've fleshed out and they've built this story around him, and they have done it remarkably well. And honestly, for what it's worth, this is a standalone story. It tells the story of Bill and Frank. So Bill is actually in the video game The Last of Us. However, he's a side character that you and Ellie come across as you are passing through his small town, Lincoln, I believe the name is. The small town of Lincoln. So they're passing through. They get supplies by Bill. Frank is just like a name that's written on a piece of paper somewhere. It's alluded that Frank lived there with Bill in a while, but he hates his guts, something like that. So they've taken this character of Bill and gave him a much more fleshed out story, in which that Frank, and by the way, Bill is played by the Nick Offerman, who absolutely nails Bill down to a T. So yeah, what happened to the story? So we get introduced to Bill. He sort of quarantined himself off to the world at the beginning of the pandemic, when the cordyceps first breaks out, to the point where he now lives in his small little neighborhood in a small town by himself, and he fortifies it, builds traps around it to keep the clickers at bay, and he's living peacefully there until one day during the pandemic, during the cordyceps outbreak, a sensor trips, and we're introduced to Frank, who has fallen in one of the traps that Bill has set, and then Bill ultimately decides to help him out, and then the rest of the story plays out in that Bill, for living for 20 years on his own, with no outside connections, by himself, suddenly there's this non-infected human that comes along, and we are treated to one of the most heartwarming love stories that has ever been told in TV, films, video game history, and media history. I think, as there's a shot of Bill right there, it's a very human story. It's a very broken down, stripped away story of love in a pandemic, and what the human, how life in amongst the cordyceps pandemic, in amongst the outbreak, the human emotions, the human connections that are still there, that people are losing, but it tells the story so well and so beautifully in amongst all of this that it's gonna play with your emotions. It is really going to play with your emotions so hard watching this, especially because these are two characters that are new, that are these are first time we're seeing these guys in this episode in the series. So automatically, we've got Joel and Elliot. They're on the back burner for this episode. So this is, episode 3 is based around Bill and Frank. And they did it so well that you're not going to bat an eye. You're taken away from Joel and Ellie. So we know what's happening with Joel. They're crossing across the country. They're working their way over the countryside. So we know what they're doing. And by the way, before I get into the main part of the storyline, we get hints, we get that sort of glimpses of what Joel, starts to embrace, and that Ellie is starting to shift from becoming this sort of cargo to becoming, this sort of figure, daughter-like figure for Joel. So we see glimpses of that at the start of the episode and towards the end. But as I said, this episode is built around Bill and Frank, and their time living in Lincoln by themselves, cut off from the world. They've only got each other. And Bill says that by Frank coming into his life, that's his purpose. Like, in amongst all the pandemic, his main goal now is to keep Bill safe. And they live out their life to an old age. They fight off raiders. They are fortified. They fortified their town. They're living peacefully and harmoniously. And it's a tense watch because you've got this beautiful story unfolding as you're watching it, but at the same time, you're wondering what's going to happen. What's going to be the outcome of this? Because as we know in The Last of Us, Frank, there is no Frank in The Last of Us. There's a little mention of Frank, of the name Frank, that is written on a little piece of paper that you could find in the game as you're exploring the area. And we get the hint that Frank became infected, and he's infected, so obviously he's not around anymore. But he leaves this note, and it hints that he did live with Bill for a long time. But they turn up, Frank hates Bill. So there's that. So you're thinking, what's going to happen here? Is Bill going to become infected? Oh, sorry, Frank. Is Frank going to become infected and Bill's going to have to shoot him down? And you're thinking, all these things playing through your head. Turns out that wasn't the case. Turns out they live a long life, a long, happy, peaceful life in amongst this chaos, in amongst this cordyceps outbreak, in amongst all the clicker, all the zombie outbreak. They found happiness. They found purpose. And I think that especially resonating well, especially after COVID, and how a lot of people were cut off and a lot of isolation. There was a lot of isolated times throughout the pandemic, and I think people are going to relate to that, in that you've got all this craziness happening in the world, but in amongst all of that, you're there with something that you care about and someone that you care about. So I think people are going to relate to that really well. And it just, like I said, it's intense. It's intense to watch because you're always constantly thinking, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to these characters who you are only just introduced right now to these characters, and just the introduction and the way that they are portrayed and the human emotions that these wonderful actors pull off. So Nick Offerman who, yeah, like I said, he absolutely 100% swings for the fences as Frank, as Bill, sorry, and whacks it out of the park. I'm just trying to, yeah, Frank Murray Bartlett, who portrays Frank. So yeah, like I said, they draw you in because the first time you meet these characters, they draw you in, and you suddenly care about these characters. You want to know what happens to them, and you want to, you're constantly thinking what's going to happen to these characters. And I think that bit of suspense throughout the episode just keeps your eyes to the TV. You've got all these theories running through your brain. What's going to happen? Who's going to come for them? And it turns out, and there's a shot that's going to come up shortly that. There you go. That's them living peacefully. That's their first thing together. Oh, sorry, that was their last one. We'll get to that shortly. But they live a long, healthy, prosperous. I'm getting tongue-tied on that word. Prosperous life, to an extent, because it turns out so they live this long, happy life, and life is good for Bill and Frank. Until off-screen, it's not mentioned, but Frank's health turns south. He becomes wheelchair-bound. You can see that he's sick. And the thing is, they didn't mention what sickness he has, because one, and I like that they didn't mention it because, one, there's no doctors around. Bill's not a doctor. Bill's not a doctor. So Bill wouldn't know what condition that Frank has. You can see, like, doctors probably look at the way that, and by the way, the makeup and the set design and all that's incredible in the show, especially in episode 3. But you can see that Frank is starting to, he's become sick and he's dying. And we get that absolutely incredible, heart-wrenching last day that Frank says to Bill, this is what I want. This is my last day alive. I'm going to do this. We're going to live a happy day. And then you're going to feed me this pills and I'm going to drink it. And my time on this earth is done. So Bill has to live with that for the last day. This is Frank's last day. They end up getting married. They just, enjoyed their last day and the last meal, which I don't know if it was the same meal they had when they first met, but they had this beautiful dinner together. And yeah, it's the moment's come that Frank says, he's drinking the wine and looks at Bill, and Bill knows that it's time to do what Frank has asked. He crushes up the pills, pop it into the drink, and Bill drinks it. Frank drinks it. It's then revealed that Bill has actually popped the rest of the pills into the bottle itself, and he's taken a big gulp as well. So then he goes on to say that, he found his purpose. His purpose was Frank. They've lived a peaceful life together. They've grown old together. He can't go on living without Frank there. There's no point in continuing on. Plus, he's becoming old himself. And then, it's become apparent that, this is it. And I got to tell you that from start to finish, from Bill and Frank's storyline is the absolute best, one of the greatest television episodes in TV history in the last 5-10 years. And John Campea said it on his show that it's the best TV episode that he's seen in his, in recent memory. And I'm going to agree with him because, when you watch this episode, and like I said, like I keep saying, you're constantly ticking what's going to happen when you watch it for the first time. I've watched it twice already because I watched it, I did something else. The next day, I was thinking about it and I'm thinking, you know what, I've got to watch this again because that episode was perfection, absolute brilliance. And watching it again, even knowing what's going to happen, it still, tugs at your emotion. It's still grips you. It still pulls you in, and it still holds you hostage on the couch watching the TV. And I really appreciate that, and I really, I absolutely, it just raised the bar with what this series is taking. So episode 1 started here, 2, 3. I can't wait, absolutely cannot wait for episode 4. So that's that. It's bookended by Joel and Ali's story. So at the start we get Joel, we get a bit of a flashback scene to when Tess meets them. They and the absolute one of the best scenes in the shows, because Bill's this he's this paranoid guy. He's always has been. He's been this paranoid conspiracy, government conspiracy guy. And he's at the show, and Tess and Frank go inside the house, and then he's just left there with Joel, and he's pointing the gun at him, just to show that the non-trust there, even though Frank is the complete opposite. He's saying, "Come to the house, come have a look around," and that's where that friendship between Bill and Frank and Joel come, which we'll get to right now. Actually, that leads into this next point, in that bookended by the Joel and Ali story. So they're at the start and at the end, and then you got this absolute cinematic, beautiful story wedged in between, which is the best adaptation that has ever been made. We get to the end, so Joel is, carrying his mission out, comes through Lincoln. So it's hinted at that they ended up actually trusting Joel that much that Joel knows the code to get into the town. Goes to the house. First thing he notices is that the flowers are dead, which wouldn't happen if they were, if something wasn't up. Goes into the house, and it's empty. It's quiet. There's no sign of life, literally. And that's where Ali finds the note that Bill left to say that, explain what had happened. Don't go into the bedroom because we're in there. Left the window open for the smell. Take the supplies. Take my card if you need it. Take whatever you need and keep, weapons, whatever. They're all there for Joel and Tess. And at that mention, that's the other thing that really tugs at your emotions as well in this episode. So not only you get that whole Bill and Frank heartstrings getting pulled on, you get this little moment where the mention of Tess sort of triggers this thing within Joel that he, tells Ellie to stay there, and he goes outside and he has a moment of reflection. He's about Tess. And then we get the sort of interactions with Joel and Ali that we know from the game, but they start to develop this bond. So they jump into the car, and by the way, any doubters around Bella Ramsey, then you guys are all gone, because Bella Ramsey portraying Ali gets better and better the more screen time she gets, and the more time she's on the screen, and the more interaction she's getting. So the moment when she gets in the car and you're thinking, oh, she hasn't been in a car before, and the way that Bella Ramsey portrays it is absolutely, hits the nail on the head. So we get this little moment with Joel and Ali driving off into the car, and then the absolute perfect ending to a TV episode that you get is they're driving off into the distance, and the camera's panning back to an open window. And you know what's inside the window, and you know what's you can read into that as much as you want, but I think that was the absolute most beautiful way to finish off one of the best TV storylines that has ever been written. Oh, so that is The Last of Us episode 3, getting that part out of the way. That's what happened. I am absolutely keen to see what happens episode 4, but let me just finish off this episode by saying this. I've seen a lot of comments online, a lot of people saying and complaining, and that's what they are, they're whingers, complaining about the fact that this episode, they're saying, oh, it's filler. Has nothing to do with the story. It's filler. It's unnecessary. It's long. There's no need for it. I've seen these comments. And let me just, to those people, one, you don't understand. You have no... about to drop an F word there. You have no idea what you're talking about, because... Is this episode filler? No. It's expanding the world. It's expanding the story. It's enhancing the story in the world that has been created in The Last of Us to show us glimpses of... Okay, so rewind. They're complaining that, oh, this deviates from the game. Well, this is not the game. This is not the fucking game. This is the TV show. This is an adaptation of source material, which happens to be a video game, which, by the way, has the creator, one of the co-creators of the video game, as a showrunner, who was leading the story and is making these changes, along with someone who's made one of the greatest TV miniseries in Chernobyl ever made. So you're going to go and tell the co-creator of the game, you're going to walk up to him and say, this game doesn't follow the game, because he'll tell you to get out of his face. What this does is adapt the source material, enhances the story, and it expands the world to say that there are more things happening in this world. Because if you want the Joel and Ellie story, which is absolutely incredible in itself, go play the fucking game. Because if we had an episode around Joel and Ellie around this time, they're just walking across the country. In the game, you're just exploring, you're going through here and there, you come across clickers or whatever. They're just walking across the country. So we know what's happening. We know they're walking to this point. But we get this absolutely moving, absolutely just world-building, moving, emotional story wedged in between all the chaos. And that's what good adaptations do. It takes the source material, it adapts it for the screen, it stays true and stays to the spirit of the game, which this episode does, and it enhances it, which the episode does. It adds Frank to the mix, who we only just mentioned in the game, but we actually see it play out. And the writing, and the episode, it's long filler. Well, no, it's not. You couldn't get enough. The original cut for this was 2 hours, and I'm sure if they had the 2 hour cut, it would have just breezed by. Like, this is about an hour 20, hour 15, and it doesn't feel like that at all as you're watching the show. And that's just a testament to how well written, how well paced, how well told the Last of Us TV adaptation is. You don't need all the unnecessary things in there. It's just to the point, and it keeps in what it needs to keep in. It cuts out what it needs to cut out. It changes, and every change that this show has made from the game has been for the better. It's been to improve the story, the way it's told on TV. So that's what I have to say about that. So for all the people who are complaining that it deviated from the game, it is basically a nonsense episode. There's nothing to it. You have no fucking idea what you're talking about. That's what I got to say to you. And I'll be honest. Look, I'm going to say it. I don't know if it gets him in hot water, but nobody would be blinking an eye if it was a male and female love storyline. I think the fact that, and I've actually, you know what, and I've seen it. I've seen people comment the fact that, we've got a gay relationship play out on the screen, and people complain, what's it? Well, those people have no idea who Frank is, because in the game, that's his character. He's a gay character in the game. So for those complaining, blah, 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 you haven't played the game, you don't know the storyline, so you have no say in this whatsoever. That's what I say about you. But yeah, that's The Last of Us Episode 3 Afterparty. Some of my thoughts about the episode, and like I said, I can't wait to get into Episode 3. Just a side note as well, they've announced The Last of Us Season 2, and I think he said that it's going to adapt the second game, which says that the first game is going to get wrapped up in a nice little package in Season 1. So that is that. But the question now is for you guys. What did you think of The Last of Us Episode 3? What are some things you liked? What are some things that you maybe didn't like? What did you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And let's get a discussion around The Last of Us. That's going to do it for today's episode. If you like this edition and you want to see more, please leave a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell to stay up to date for when our next upload is right here on Port Royal Pop. Thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you back here very soon. It's goodbye for now.